This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
We have a hormonal highway in our bodies.
We have to look at all the systems and the connection between them.
Hormones are the messengers of the body.
All of these systems, how are they interacting with one another?
We have to get back to basics and understand the critical importance of diet for health.
If we optimize our microbiome, we take care of our gut. We are, in effect, helping our hormones at the same time.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the healing journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? In Season 2 of The Shift, we explore the intricate world of women's health and help you discover how to balance your hormones and understand yourself better so that you can truly thrive.
The menstrual cycle is a vital sign of female well-being.
My mum just used to say, "Oh, Nan, I'm so sorry. It's part of being a woman."
I would like a call to arms for women to know that their intuition isn't lying to them.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. In this season of The Shift, we're talking about women's health. And there is no better example of how the body works as a whole than to look at our hormones and endocrine system. Your endocrine system, which includes your hypothalamus, pituitary, ovaries, thyroid, adrenals, pancreas, and pineal gland, is an intricate network of glands that secrete various substances into your body. These endocrine organs work with specific functions in your body, but they also interact as a team, with each part affecting the other. There'll be more on the specifics of this as we move through the series. In this episode of The Shift, I'm going to explore the concept of synergy. Once you understand this concept, it will completely transform the way you look at your health. Unfortunately, in our modern healthcare system, the concept of synergy and holistic healthcare is foreign and very much ignored. So if we use an example in the endocrine system, if you have issues with your thyroid and also reproductive hormones, you'll see that they are very much interconnected, and we need to look at how they function as a whole. When we truly understand what impacts what in the body, we can then develop targeted treatment plans that address the whole of you, providing side benefits rather than side effects, and helping your body to heal as a whole without fighting the forces of other systems getting in the way. Dr. Amy Shah is an integrative doctor and author with a focus on holistic health. First up, she explains how she sees synergy when it comes to hormonal balance.
What I see is women often think that they have an isolated hormone problem. It's my thyroid, doc, or it's my adrenal. I have adrenal fatigue, or it's my estrogen, whatever it may be. But what I realized through my own journey and what I teach is that we have a hormonal highway in our bodies with interconnected roads and then exits like off-ramps. It starts in your brain with a master hormonal switch called the GnRH, so gonadotropin releasing hormone. That is a pulsatile hormone that starts the entire cascade. And when that GnRH gets feedback that there's a traffic slowdown or that there's an accident or that there is another problem, it will adjust its pulsatile nature. It will go faster, slower, stop. And so often you will see people with multiple hormonal issues, and that's because it's not just one hormone that goes awry. It's this highway full of traffic, or there's a big accident. So if there's a big accident, say near your thyroid, you're going to feel it all over your body because there's going to be a slowdown everywhere. And so the way I think about hormones is that it's interconnected series of places around our body that communicate with each other and communicate back with the brain. So fixing the entire system, unclogging that traffic jam is the best thing you could do for your hormones.
Next up, we have Dr. Vincent Pedre, who's another integrative doctor that's been working with clients with this holistic viewpoint for years. You might remember Dr. Pedre from Season 1 of The Shift. I resonated with what he had to say so much that I just had to get him back for Season 2. The way that he explains synergy here is really easy to grasp.
I see the body as a symphony, and when you go listen to a symphony orchestra, what makes the beauty of these experiences and how the instruments interact with each other, and they create this whole melody, which is the music you hear, but it's really created by all these individual instruments playing together. And that's basically what your body is. It's a summation of all these different organ systems interacting with each other. And there's no organ system that is isolated from another. So everything depends on everything. That's what we call systems biology. And I don't see any other way to look at the body.
If you're curious about your hormonal health, take our quiz. You'll get a report with insights into some key areas you need to look at when it comes to getting your hormones in alignment, as well as some handy tips to get you started. Go to theshiftclinic.com/links.
Synergy, it's one of my favourite words. Nothing in the body stands alone. Everything has a ripple effect, one thing to something else. So, for example, what I would see very commonly in clinical practice working with women of all ages, early on in life, and unfortunately it's starting to happen at younger and younger ages, young girls will start to fiddle with what they're eating, and that usually involves some sort of restriction. And quite often their intake of iron, amongst other nutrients, but particularly iron, starts to go low, because across the menstruation years, obviously, we need about 18 milligrams of iron per day just to prevent deficiency. And it's very difficult to even eat that much, even when you're, eating satisfying, sustaining meals. So I think the iron intake can start to be suboptimal quite early on in people's lives. And then often stress will start, whether that's challenges with friends or schoolwork or university or in your working life or with money or flatmates or whatever it is, the stress starts. And as the stress starts, that obviously changes our chemistry significantly. It starts to change the HPA axis. It alters progesterone production. It can, in extreme cases, start to disrupt ovulation. So then you don't have enough progesterone, which obviously is a powerful anti-anxiety agent. So then often food choices aren't so great if people have moved out of home initially, and they might be living on what I refer to as far too many liver loaders, far too much alcohol and takeaway and highly processed foods, and fat accumulation can start to happen in the liver. That then leads to estrogen dominance. So now they've got too much estrogen, plus they've already got not enough progesterone, and all of this is affecting metabolism. And with the high levels of estrogen, that then starts to mess with thyroid function, plus with the heavy periods that comes with that estrogen dominance, there's more blood loss. So the iron deficiency becomes even worse, and we need iron to make thyroid hormones. So then by the time this whole cascade of events has occurred, often women are in their mid-40s and they'll be diagnosed with a thyroid condition, and they don't necessarily understand where it's come from. But that's what I call a synergistic or layering effect as well. So there are so many different things that come together to create what ends up as a thyroid problem, but the thyroid just didn't suddenly wake up one day and go, I'm not going to work properly anymore. It's years and years of suboptimal nutrition, of way too much stress, and I guess putting up with menstrual cycle problems that women don't need to put up with. So there's a bit of a coming together of lots of different factors that then lead to something that we can see or experience, and it requires a synergistic approach then to undo it all.
That was Dr. Libby Weaver, nutritionist and bioscientist. This type of thinking is exactly how our naturopaths work at Shift. We look at the progression of your disease and which areas are impacting what. Moira Bradfield is a naturopath specialising in the microbiomes of the reproductive tract. If you've listened to season 1 of The Shift, you might remember that your gut microbes are related to your vaginal microbes, and we're going to share some really interesting insights on this from Moira later in the series. I was interested to hear what Moira thought about synergy.
Synergy, for me, is a pretty complex concept, I guess, in terms of how things work together. And one of the things, as a practitioner, I became aware I was really fond of, which is still a concept of synergy, is homeostasis. And that, for me, can permeate through multiple levels, not just on the physiology of cells and how they talk to each other and how they integrate into a body, but also in terms of how people interact with their environment. So when we have that sort of synergy or harmony, those aspects of homeostasis are balanced and don't necessarily take extremely from one area or the other. And when we look at homeostasis as a concept, the body is always maintaining or striving for some sort of balance that is the most comfortable, I guess, for the individual. And that can become disordered as well. And so that, for me, is a really important concept because I have to understand what that means or what that takes from the individual or the organism or the environment and how we can actually support that and bring that back to balance as well. So the synergy in that is, understanding the individual in their multiple environments, but also how we can work together with other disciplines as well. So it's very multifactorial.
The body is so brilliantly interconnected, and it's in quite a modern Western conventional sense to separate the body as separate systems. Another word for functional medicine is systems medicine or integrative medicine. But specifically, if we talk about systems medicine, it is this brilliant interconnectedness of the body. When in balance, it gives rise to you feeling amazing and having optimal energy and all the amazing things that optimal wellness brings about. But when the interconnectedness is off, when there's imbalance in the body, problems in one system can cause a ripple effect, a cascade effect in other parts of the body. For example, like things going on in the gut don't just end in the gut and just that's it. But because of through the gut-brain axis and the vagus nerve, the gut is your second brain. It's actually formed from the same fetal tissue as the brain when babies are growing in their mom's womb. But some dysfunction in the gut can impact the brain. So things like anxiety and depression and fatigue and brain fog can have its roots actually in the gut. So it's really important for people to understand, just from a practical standpoint, if you're not feeling well, we have to look at all the systems and the connection between them to really understand and deal with it so you can move on with your life and feel great.
That was Dr. Will Cole. Dr. Cole is an integrative doctor and author from New York City. I love his holistic approach and also the way that he integrates mind-body principles into his work. You'll hear more from him as we move through the series.
It's really curious how the conventional medical world has broken the body into all these different organs. And of course, there's not this organ working in isolation from another. So looking at the whole body, I actually started in really the same approach that Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, I started looking at the gut. And then by understanding how the GI tract, how it worked and how it linked to the immune system, how it interplayed with the circadian rhythm and the hormones of the body, it really helped me to tie the whole body together. And I could see how the immune system, how it acted as sort of an information system, that it wasn't just about inflammation, that it was really how all the organs communicated. And then, of course, it expanded to the ovaries. If you have inflammation in the whole body, the ovaries become inflamed, and then it doesn't work as well, and you're going to lower fertility, and you're going to lower your production of hormones in the way they normally should be produced. So when you have problems with your gut or your brain, all of those things interact in a bidirectional way, and it gets, of course, more expanded. So the ovaries interlink. And then once you have hormonal dysfunction, hormones are the messengers of the body. They're telling all the different organs what to do. And if you don't have the proper hormones, and not just that you have hormones, they have to be produced with the right rhythms. So now we know everything is rhythmic in the body. And estrogen is what it turns out for a woman is really what I'll call the hormonal glue that actually links all the organs in the body together to create metabolic harmony for the purpose of reproductive success. And of course, whenever you have abnormal amounts of estrogen or you're not metabolizing it properly, so maybe you have too much or you have too little, for example, you're in menopause, you're not making any from your ovaries. So it turns out that hormones, when you really start understanding them, it helps to understand the whole body. And it changed my whole understanding of what the female body is really focused on.
That was Dr. Felice Gersch, an integrative gynecologist from California. Dr. Gersch is one of very few of her kind, as most gynecologists work only on the female reproductive system. Anything else would fall outside of their scope of practice and they'd be referring to other specialists. The endocrine system is so interconnected that really gynecology and endocrinology should be combined as a specialty together. Dr. Vincent Pedre and I spoke a lot about gut health in season 1 of The Shift. So I asked him if he could explain the synergy in this area when it comes to hormones.
So let's expand on what we mean by when we're talking about gut. Let's say the gut is not just the digestive system. So the esophagus, stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, that's what most people think of. But let's think of it as a whole system. And a key important part of that system is the liver. And then another key component of this system is the gut microbiome. So together, they help in processing out hormone metabolites and balancing out our hormones, and the gut microbiome is integrally involved with that because it can also metabolize our own hormones. The other really important example is how hormones are processed out. So for example, estrogen needs to be metabolized once it's served its purpose. So it gets metabolized and moved out of the body, and it gets moved out through the bile. And in order to do that, it needs to get anchored by phase 2 detox enzymes that basically tie an anchor to the estrogen so it can't come back into the body. And then it gets excreted in the bile into the gut. Now, the gut bacteria, if you have a dysbiosis, like an overgrowth of certain bacteria that produce an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase, that beta-glucuronidase can come in and cut off that anchor that was supposed to keep the estrogen from coming back into your body. And now, free of that anchor, the estrogen can flow back into your body. And this causes a syndrome that many women have probably heard of called estrogen dominance, which is characterized by a lot of uncomfortable symptoms that a woman would register as just feeling like my hormones are out of balance.
In my eyes, gut health is the same thing as endocrine health. They're really tied to each other. The microbiome is really an organ system that contributes to the regulation of our metabolism, and the hormones play a large role in all of that. We have the metabolites that the microbiome makes. These metabolites can act as factors that can influence our hormones. So really, if we optimize our microbiome, we take care of our gut, we are, in effect, helping our hormones at the same time.
That was, of course, our resident gastroenterologist, Dr. Marvin Singh, who you'll also recognise from season 1 of The Shift. We have more on this coming up shortly. Dr. Felice Gersch, who you heard from earlier, is a passionate advocate for eating the right food to help us nourish and heal. So I wanted to hear what she had to say about this in relation to the holistic picture.
Well, everything depends on having proper nutrients. So we know that minerals, for example, are very important. So you can't have anything work properly when you have any critical ingredient missing. So if you are missing a key mineral or a key vitamin, even though you have others, then you're not going to have proper function. You can name any cycle, the Krebs cycle, hormone receptors, the production of hormones, they all rely on having this incredible array of nutrients, micronutrients. So you need to have all the different minerals. You have to have all the vitamins. And different receptors may require trace minerals like zinc or even things like selenium and so on. So you have to have all of your minerals in place. That's why I keep telling people, everyone loves to eat. But most people are eating not because they understand why they should eat. They're eating for recreation. Because I travel a lot, because I speak around the world, and I'm in airports, and I watch people eating stuff. It doesn't even qualify as food by the definition of food. And they're putting this in their mouths, and they're not thinking, well, how are my thyroid receptors going to function today, or my insulin receptors, when I'm not taking in any trace minerals? And we know that so many minerals that used to be in the water supply, we don't get them anymore. Like, what happened to iodine? We're so deficient. Almost the whole world is deficient in iodine now. And lithium. Lithium is a trace mineral that's essential for the brain receptors to work for many things, like serotonin. These are really key neurotransmitters that require trace minerals like lithium, and it doesn't work without it. So we have to get back to basics and understand the critical importance of diet for health, for every part of health. If you don't have proper hormones and hormone receptors and you don't have the right micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, then your body is going to be so far from optimally functioning, you're not going to have the quality of life you desire.
So here we begin to see that there's an internal synergy happening between your cells, mediators, tissues, and organs in your body. But the external input also impacts on the symphony of what is going on. What we eat has a massive impact, and every time we put something in our mouths, it's going to help the synergistic workings of the body or put it out of balance. Part of the issue with eating poorly is its impact on the gut and microbiome. As Dr. Marvin Singh mentioned earlier, gut health is endocrine health. Dr. Singh also talked about how our microbes impact our hormones on a biochemical level.
I always knew that the microbes in the gut can impact our hormone system, but I think really understanding some more of the details, it became really fascinating to me. And it really seems that this concept of these bacterial metabolites is really what's going to be on the next forefront of understanding the microbiome. And metabolites, I guess, to try to put it in simple terms, is basically, you can think of it as like a chemical that is produced by the different bacteria. And these chemicals could be good or they could be bad, and they could do good things or they could do bad things. And they can upregulate things, they could downregulate things. They're basically little chemicals that do things, if you want to put it in the most simplest of terms. And really understanding all about these metabolites and what bacteria make them and what they can do, that's really where it's going to be very important to understand, because these bacterial metabolites can act as endocrine factors. They can regulate our metabolism. They could make us fat. They could make us skinny. They could make us hungry. They could make us not hungry. They can change our motility. They do so many different things. And so really going back to that initial quote from Hippocrates, all disease begins in the gut, really, this is where it's all at. It's not necessarily the presence of the microbe itself. It's what the microbe is doing. That's the important part.
But it's not just about the gut microbiome. You actually have microbiomes in many places in the body, including your ovaries, uterus, and vagina. I was very curious to see what reproductive microbiome expert Moira Bradfield had to say about this. Moira is a naturopath who is currently completing her PhD on the vaginal microbiome, and she's considered a world leader in this area. I asked her what the research was showing in regards to reproductive microbiomes.
So they're looking at them in health and in disease, obviously, and the role of these microbiomes are of particular interest when we look at things like fertility and IVF. And it's hard to sample these microbiome sites. So some of the research which comes out is always characterised or criticised in many points about the possibility of contamination, because to really sample them, it's looking at invasive sampling procedures and biopsies and really controlling for that as well. So everything that we look at needs to sort of have that lens put on top of it. But we do see traits where, for example, we see microbiome characteristics for the endometrium in terms of endometriosis. It tends to have higher loads of anaerobic microbes like Prevotella and Gardnerella, which when we look at the vaginal microbiome are associated with a dysbiotic shift. So they are associated with things like bacterial vaginosis. So some of that complexity around endometriosis, where we're looking at microbial drivers of that, comes into play when we understand upstream effects, and whether they are upstream, whether they're coming from the vagina to start with or whether they were there because it is an anaerobic environment primarily anyway. And certainly the more upstream you get, the more anaerobic it becomes and the less lactobacillus it will have. And there are people that are, in clinical practice doing endometrial sampling and things like that, but it does tend to, in my experience, show the same thing a lot of the time. But I'm also always conscious of the fact that it's very hard to sample without this bias as well. So it's worth looking at, and we can certainly make assumptions. And the vagina as a microbiome that is very easy to sample does give us insights that we can act on. And certainly changing that microbial environment has benefits that I've seen definitely upstream and beyond.
The conversation continues in our Shift community group. Join the group by heading to theshiftclinic.com/links. Okay, so we can now understand that our body systems are interconnected, our hormones are interconnected, and our microbes are connected with us too. But what about our thoughts and emotions? How do they play into the holistic version of health?
The brain is filled with estrogen receptors, and estrogen is anxiolytic. It helps reduce anxiety. Estrogen also is very key to maintaining the function of what are called the serotonin neurons. They're the neurons of the brain that make serotonin, the hormone that the drugs like Prozac and Lexapro and so on are supposed to increase serotonin. So estrogen helps maintain proper serotonin levels. So many women, when they transition into the perimenopausal years and then into the postmenopausal years, they have mood swings. They often have anxiety and depression. And estrogen has the potential to help that. And like so many things, there's always a shortage of actual clinical data. We have a lot of scientific data, lots of studies on rats, fewer on humans. But we know that these receptors are there. We know that estrogen does maintain serotonin production, and that women very commonly have problems with mood swings, depression, anxiety during the menopausal years. In the United States, during the menopausal transition years, something like at least 25% of women are put on antidepressants. What is that saying, right? So, we definitely have to use all our tools. So we want to look at mind-body medicine techniques. There's so many that we can find. That some women like guided imagery or self-hypnosis or some form of meditation. So there are many ways that we can use to help keep people calmer and happier. But we do want to recognize that it's very related to estrogen in some women, just like women who have PMS, there is hormonally based. But of course, the environment always has a big interplay as well. And of course, when women go through menopause, they're often what we call the sandwich generation, right? They have teenagers that are driving them crazy, and their husband is going through a midlife crisis, and their parents are aging and elderly and having medical problems, and they're just at their wits' end, being pulled in all these directions. And then on top of that, their hormones are going wild. So it can be a very challenging time. And I'm all in favor of using every tool I can to help women to weather this time.
That was Dr. Felice Gersch again. This is a really good example of where an issue may be put in a silo and not dealt with in a holistic way. Hormonal changes impact the brain because there are hormone receptors in the brain. Women are so often put on antidepressants when really it's a hormonal issue, not a serotonin deficiency issue. We talk more about this in episode 4. What about the impacts of our relationships on our health? Is the interconnectedness we have to each other an important part of the picture?
It's across the board: physical well-being, psychological well-being, healthy relationships. We can understand that because humans have always lived in groups, be they family groups, tribal groups, being connected to other people. And, some people obviously find connection harder or more challenging than others, but we know that healthy connection improves immunity. I mean, something as simple as that, like a lovely hug, and I'm not talking about a sexual hug, a hug, that sort of physical contact. We know after so many seconds that people start to get oxytocin, and that increases immunity. There's these hard science, evidence-based findings about how important healthy relationships are to our life experience, and which is why people found it so tricky in lockdown and why we need to manage isolation, because the World Health Organization is really concerned about light pollution, noise pollution, and the impact of loneliness. And unfortunately, it's actually not older adults, it's actually the young people. Social media has not necessarily made young people feel more socially connected or have a true social support network, which is health giving. They might be connected, but they don't have that level of social connectivity.
That was Dr. Nicola Gates, a clinical neuropsychologist, researcher and author. Nicola is a wealth of information and has over 24 peer-reviewed publications in international medical journals. You'll hear from Nicola more as we move through the series and discuss the impacts of our emotional well-being as women more thoroughly. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss a thing. If you listened to season 1 of The Shift, you might remember me talking about this amazing interconnectedness we all have. And I'm hoping that as we move through this episode, you can see this happens on so many levels. When things are isolated or disconnected, we have a lot of trouble healing. But what about the unseen parts of ourselves? What about things that impact us beyond our thoughts and physical health? I asked naturopath, author and intuitive healer Kate Reardon what holistic healing means to her.
I think it's just this acknowledgement that we're more than this flesh and bone, and we're more than this freight train of thoughts that run incessantly through our head every day. We are made up of so much substance and soul. We're from the earth. We have fire in us, water in us, air in us. Earth runs through our flesh and blood. And so it's acknowledging some of those, whether you want to call it soul or whether you want to call it spirit, but those layers of ourself that we might not touch on that day-to-day basis when we're just on that little hamster wheel and, dropping the kids off at school and going about our life. So to give that some reference, there's a beautiful Vedic terminology that when I was studying yoga, and there's a framework in the layers of consciousness, and they're explained in a way that the first layer is it's air, it's our breath. And then we have our body, and we know what our body is. That's the thing that we live in every day. And then the Manamaya Kosha is the mind. It's our thinking mind. It's where we create problems. It's where we solve problems. It's our thoughts. It's our beliefs. It's our narrative in comparison to experiences that we have. It's all of those thoughts that bob around in our head from day to day. Go beyond that, and we have access to our intuition. And our intuition is the all-encompassing, all-seeing part of us that sees and feels and processes everything. And then the outer layer of that is the bliss layer, it's the God layer. And every, religion or mysticism leads us to that point, of dharma or bliss or enlightenment or love, whatever we want to label it as. One of the things that I really love that can really pierce through this layer is when you have an emotional response and you don't know why. So, for example, you might hear a song on the radio, or you might see a piece of art and it will just break your heart open, or it will make you cry, or it will bring back a memory. And that's when all of you is feeling and responding to that stimuli. And so when we get stuck in these different parts of ourself, the Manamaya Kosha, the mind, for example, we might be thinking, I don't like it. I do like it. Oh, I wish they used that green, or why did she sing that lyric? And this makes me feel sad. And we're kind of stuck in that particular layer of consciousness. But when we're feeling it all, when we have this experience of wholeness, your whole body is feeling that. And that's when tears will come, or sweat will come, or a wave of heat, or an orgasm, or, something will come to let you know that not only are you feeling and sensing and being this multidimensional creature that we are, but that you are fully, fully present. And that's the energy that I work with.
All right. So we understand that synergy exists, and right now your body is undergoing an amazing symphony of events to keep you healthy and in balance. Now I want to explore how we might use this concept of synergy to bring about healing. Here we have Dr. Robin Murphy again, looking at some of the nuances of this synergistic effect.
Well, systems biology is really looking at how these complex interactions between the biological systems, so things like our digestive health, our neurological health, endocrine function, metabolic function, the microbiome, all of these systems, how are they interacting with one another to give rise to symptoms and disease? And so when we're looking at this from a relationship in accordance to health and medicine, we're trying to understand how are these systems working in concert with one another to develop symptoms, as well as to help inform us of how we're going to address these symptoms as well. So address them not just from looking for medication and trying to stop that symptom, but trying to understand, what are the perhaps biochemical nuances, the nutrients, the interacting factors, things like the microbiome, our hormones, environmental toxins. How do these all connect and interact with one another to influence our body's response to these triggers? And how do we modify that with things like diet and nutraceuticals or natural remedies, other plant medicines, and ways that we can modify these systems accordingly?
One of the biggest downfalls of our healthcare system and modern medicine is the lack of understanding of the body as a whole. In medical school, doctors are taught to look at isolated issues and isolated systems. A patient can have many different specialists, and usually none of them really speak to each other. Rebecca is a shift member who knew this process all too well. When she came to see us, she had seen 5 different specialists in the last 18 months. As she sat with our naturopaths, she explained how she'd seen an endocrinologist, gynecologist, dermatologist, ear, nose and throat specialist, and even a gastroenterologist. None of these specialists really communicated with one another, and she was no closer to a solution when she decided to come to see us at Shift. I asked her how she felt going through the medical system with her multi-system complaints.
I found the system to be ludicrous. At no time did any of these specialists say there was something wrong. There was fundamentally something wrong with me, but they could never tell me what that was. They couldn't help me fix what it was. All they could do was give me medication to mask it or moderate it in some way so that I could live with it. It was always here's a drug, you will be on this for the rest of your life. And I have had several incidences of that. I can't even find a GP that takes me seriously. I'll tell a GP that, look, this is a bit off. I feel like this. I think after 20 years, I know potentially my thyroxine's a little bit out of whack. My hormones are out of whack. Something's out of whack. I need to have it tested. And they literally pat you on the head and go, oh, we'll come back in 6 weeks and let me know how that is. So I couldn't even find a GP I liked. And I reckon I have a name for myself that she's really difficult. The last one did say to me, well, at least you're very self-aware. And I get that that is frustrating for them, but I know me and I know that there was something fundamentally wrong. And so I needed to find that person who could be that linchpin and go, let's look at the whole thing. I don't understand the medical way of trying to suppress your body's symptoms when realistically it's your body trying to talk to you and say, hey, there's something wrong. What can you do to help? And by taking these drugs, all I was doing was just basically making myself feel awful. That in itself, and not feeling listened to or heard or understood by a specialist, was enough to make you mentally start feeling poorly. It really frustrated me because in the end, I felt after doing this for nearly 20 years, I knew more about my blood levels, my Hashimoto symptoms, my issues, I guess, than my endocrinologist did. She had no idea. And I would say to her, all of these things have got to be tied in somewhere. I just needed to find the link that could tie everything together. There's no way that my body had all these different areas of concern that weren't connected in some way.
This scenario isn't isolated. Many of our patients are under the care of multiple specialists when they come to see us. I wanted to know what integrative gastroenterologist Dr. Marvin Singh thought of the way the medical system was set up.
Well, I think the conventional way of practicing is still very much like that. So, you have a heart problem or an endocrine problem or a gynecologic female problem, you say, well, that's really not my area of specialty. You're going to need to see somebody else, and then they get referred. That's really how it is still here, very compartmentalized. But, and there's no problem with using other specialists because other people may know about various different organ systems better than you because they have done surgery in that area or they have done extra special training in that area more than you have. But I think what we miss is that it doesn't matter that there are different organ systems and different specialists. What matters is that that person in front of you is the entire picture right in front of you. And if you don't realize that there are all of these aspects that are intermingled with each other, then you may not be able to help them as well as you could if you don't at least stop and appreciate that for a moment. I often explain how the body works as kind of like a snow globe. So if you imagine a snow globe sitting on your desk, it's still. And then when you say, okay, well, I'm going to see what happens when, let's say the symptom is eczema, for example. So, okay, let's shake the snow globe. And you see all the snowflakes flying around inside that snow globe. Well, you want to know why you have eczema? The answers are in the snowflakes. How can you look at one specific snowflake and be like, the answer is going to be in that one flake? Because that one flake is flying around, moving and touching and bumping into other flakes. And that's really how the body works inside. We don't fully 100% know all the details about how every chemical or metabolite interacts with each other. But in a lot of circumstances, we do appreciate that these systems are intermingled with each other and that they're not separate on their own type of organ systems. It's all mixed together.
Synergy, rhythms, you can begin to see this beautiful symphony that your body plays to keep us healthy every day. You are a whole person. You are the sum of all of your parts. When you have an issue, whether it be a physical problem, emotion, or mental health issue, there's always a benefit to looking at your whole body and figuring out all of the contributing factors. There is always a possibility that the treatment actually needs to target somewhere different to the place where the issue is. By only treating your symptom or diagnosed condition, you are doing yourself a huge disservice. You need to treat you. And your symptoms are a part of that, but it's the whole of you that needs to be guided to healing if you want to get results. At Shift, our main specialty is treating patients with multi-system complaints. The reason we achieve such outstanding results for our clients is that we're always focused on the whole and which parts need addressing. We want to know what the role of your gut health is, your sleep, your hormones, your cycles, what you eat, what your relationships are like, your history. All of these things give vital information to help us understand where you need to make a shift. If you've been on a healing journey for a while, and this includes both physical and emotional health, and you feel like you're stuck, I'd encourage you to begin to look outside of the obvious for answers. The best people to help you with this are naturopaths, integrative doctors, and functional medicine practitioners that will look at the whole of you. If you'd like any one-on-one help, go to theshiftclinic.com where you can book a discovery and diagnosis session with one of our Shift naturopaths. In the next episode of The Shift, I'm going to explore your menstrual cycle and the natural rhythms that we all have access to as women. This is essential information that every woman needs to know, and I can't wait for you to discover these amazing insights.
Coming up on The Shift.
Turns out that being on your period doesn't make you weaker, it actually makes you stronger. Oh, whoa, that's so opposite of what I was taught growing up.
We continue to accept false mythology about our biology.
I'm definitely seeing young girls experience early puberty.
The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists decreed that your period should be considered your fifth vital sign.
This series is a production of The Shift Clinic. Hosted by Katherine Maslen. Music and sound design by Shade Furlong. Thank you to all of our experts. For more details on them, go to theshiftclinic.com.
We can be. We must be.
The first generation to end extreme poverty.
The generation most determined to fight injustice
and inequality.
The generation that saves the planet
from climate change.
And this is how we will get it done.
The global goals.
A 15-year plan for everyone, everywhere.
With no one left behind.
The global goals are a framework that collectively help us
support the health of our people
and the planet.
At Shift, we are ambassadors for the global goals.
This project supports global goal number 6.
Clean water and sanitation.
Every time you listen
to an episode of The Shift,
we provide a day's access to clean water
for a human in need
in Malawi, Africa.
Water is the foundation to health, and we believe
every human should have access
to clean, healthy water.
So please share this podcast wide
and keep tuning in
so we can impact those who need it the most.